Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Okali TV, a special edition of the one and only Writers Room. My name is Connor Burgan. Today, I am joined with me, the OSU beat writer for softball, football, men's basketball, the freshman phenom, Mr. Gabe Trevino. Gabe, it's a pleasure getting to have you on here today.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Now, let's start diving into Cowboy basketball's end their season. They just wrapped things up a couple days ago. They finished off the year 15-15, 8-10 in conference play, and it was more of a letdown considering where things were at the beginning of the year. Some of the press conferences early on, especially with the NCAA banning of the expectations were higher than ever. But this was a year that maybe that record isn't as accurate as what the story portrays.
Yeah, I mean, they did have a 500 record, but there was a lot of close games, a lot of close losses, but a lot of close wins too, and a lot of just inconsistent play from the entire season. So they easily could have been 0-30. They easily could have been 30-0. It just kind of things happened the way they did.
Well, yeah, and 16 of the 30 games, they were decided by 6 or less, and also 8 of them by 1 possession, 6 going to overtime. So this was definitely a rather, you look at it one way of how the record actually ended versus how things could have gone. It's kind of a coin flip at that rate. It just goes down to one play halfway through the first quarter, or first half. That's how things could always go down. Now let's start taking a look into the actual averages for this year, and they were more dismal than people would actually have expected. A tick under 69 in points per game, 37 rebounds per game, 12 and a half, almost 13 assists, but blocks. Now, 5.5, they were first in the Big 12 and 12th in the country. Now let's keep adding on to that. Field goal percentage, 43 and almost a half. Offensive rating and defensive rating. Now, this is kind of a big one right here. When you're looking at this, you have a near 97 offensive rating and a 93 defensive rating. Now, typically, if you have that 4-point margin, you're doing great things, especially with how low a defensive rating is. But 96.7 on offense. That's going to kind of tie into what we'll talk about with the positives and the negative of the year. But let's start taking a look over at how they compare to the national rankings. Now, we talked about their points per game. That's out of 358 schools, according to basketballreference.com, 255th. Rebounds, 79th. So we're getting the right direction. Assists, 197. And three-point percentage, 12th worst in the nation at 346th. I mean, not even shooting 30%. We're not averaging up here. 29.5. Call it there. Call it flat. And then turnovers, 14th in the nation. And yes, this is on the 4th hardest schedule in all of America, but what are we making of this?
The assists really stayed out to me. There's only, I believe, one player with a assist turnover ratio over 1. That was Isaac Likely, who commanded the ball most of the time. He was the one dishing out the assists. The 3-point percentage also sticks out. Like, the field goal percentage is kind of weighed down by the 3-point percentage. They didn't take as many threes as the average, but they missed a lot of threes. I don't think they had. I believe they only had one shooter above 30% from 3, and besides that, it was all 20%. Like, they never shot particularly well. And going back to like the offensive defensive rating, that's kind of what we predicted was Mike Boyne prides his team on defense. The players pride themselves on their defense. And when you choose defense over offense, sometimes that's what the result you get.
It is, and that it makes sense, understandably, and it just came down to the offensive execution. When you look at last year, you had Cade Cunningham there. You had a bona fide number 1 scorer, and you knew exactly what you were going to be able to get. And this was the year of where you start to figure out, well, whenever he's gone, what do we have? And we saw a multitude of games when Cunningham was out halfway through the season last year, and also in the West Virginia game in getting close to the Big 12 tournament, where you saw Avery Anderson drop 30. We saw a lot of big improvements, but when we go over to these assist over turnovers, there was only 3 that actually had a positive assist to turnover ratio, and that's Isaac Likely, like he said, Bryce Williams, and Woody Newton. And this is out of players who played 15 games or more throughout the year. But let's dive to the turnover side. You cannot have 1, 2, 3, 4. You cannot have 4 players with a turnover percentage over 20. That just cannot happen if you want this offense to be able to succeed.
One guy who particularly had a lot of turnovers was M.A. Moncrief. He took a big step back from where he was last season to this year. It feels like every time he caught the ball, he fumbled it. Every time he drove, it got stolen or ripped. He got blocked. He lost the ball, bad passes. It's just he didn't particularly play well at all. And he started the couple games at the beginning of the year, and his minutes progressively got lower and lower until he's playing around 4 minutes a game.
Yeah, and it was just a matter of all throughout the year. I think one of the big things that you could talk about was the rotations were different every single game. There was no set lineup, and that is also due to the reason that you're not going to be in the postseason. So you can be able to toy around, but it almost seemed as if that mindset started to become, wait, we don't know our lineups. We need to actually just toy around with anything, see whatever sticks, because you can't have one of the worst offenses in all of the country. And for OSU to go 15-15, that's kind of a testament to how great the defense was this year. But let's try to start shifting things over. Let's at least go over one positive throughout the year and also one negative. Now, we'd be remiss if we're not talking about the interior defense with the addition of Musa Cisse coming over from Memphis. This was an insane type of year for him. Of last year, OSU had to play a 2-3 zone to make up for the lack of real interior post dominance. Well, guards were getting into foul trouble doing that. Cunningham was always a victim of it. Caleb Boone wasn't able to hold his ground as well, but you were able to see a totally different defensive team inside the paint. What were we really seeing?
It really starts with Musa Cisse, like you said. It's not that he's 7 foot. It's not that he has a massive wingspan. It's combined with those two together, and that he has an insane vertical. Teams just at some point stopped driving on him because the ball would end up in the second row of the seats. Like
or second deck, either one.
There's times where he blocked it off the top of the backboard. He just gets to everything. His timing is excellent, and he's super long and tall and jumps out of the gym.
No, you're right. I mean, if you look at the numbers, and also you can't be remiss about Caleb Boone and his impact as well. It was a block percentage of 13. Musa was 11. Yes, Musa had more blocks and played a little bit more, but still, those numbers were there. And both those guys, top 5 in the Big 12, which that hasn't been done since 92-93. That's a historical feature right there. And that's something to be able to hang your hats on. And it's now once you have the post locked down, now it's all a matter of what guard you have out there. What is the defensive schemes? What are you going after? And you've seen on the defensive end, there was real results being made there. This entire defense was there, but just not there just yet. So we kind of went over to the positive of this. Let's move to the negative. Let's rip the Band-Aid off. And there was no it player. That has to be one of the main focuses that you talk about. Like, you had stretches of, starting off the year, Bryce Williams. He looked like he was going to be going crazy. He had his 24-point game early on. Then you start seeing Avery Anderson begin to warm up. You see Bryce Thompson begin to warm up. But it was never consistent enough. There was never that one player, game in and game out, you turn to, it's your shot.
There was the elephant in the room of there was no Cade Cunningham. He was the only player last year he shot 40% from 3. He took over 400 shots. And the only player that season 2 took over 100 shots was Avery Anderson. So people expected him to do well. Beginning of the year, he started off really slow. Had a stretch in like the Xavier game, the Cleveland State game where he was scoring really well. Then after those 2 games and a little bit into Big 12 play, he struggled a lot. And then he started picking up in the middle, and then toward the end of the season, it kind of was inconsistent. He had 25 against Oklahoma, but then 9 in the final game against Tech. Bryce Williams, like you said, he was out for a little bit at the beginning of the year because of his DUI. But then when he came back, he was scoring pretty well, especially he had 29 against Cleveland State. But then he started to kind of go back, and he played a more of a bench role, playing great defense still, but not really scoring like he was supposed to. Bryce Thompson, like you said, it took him a while to figure it out. He never was consistent, but then Baylor, he put it on. I believe he had 19 points. Texas, he had a pretty good showing. Toward the end of the stretch, he was clutch in a lot of situations, but toward the end, very end of the year, he was a little more inconsistent.
Yeah, and if you want to take a look at the 2 players that you would more consider to be those it guys, when you're looking at Avery Anderson, you're looking at Bryce Thompson, it's going to be a little rough if only one of those players is actually shooting over 40% from the field. If you take a look at just Anderson's stat in particular, 94 offensive rating, that's 9th among all Cowboys who played in 15 or more games with a 26% usage percentage. So he was being used quite often in these situations, but it's a lack of consistency when you see a turnover percentage of almost near 20, and you just can't be able to replicate success off of that. And then Bryce Thompson, on the other hand, he had his stretches, like we said. There were some games where he popped off and was going crazy. But where's that consistency? And we'll talk about that going into possibly next year of what's going to happen. But we could go over the positives, and I know a lot of OSU fans may have more negatives than the positives, and respectfully so. We respect everyone's opinions here. But let's at least start diving into the top 3 games of this season. Now, there was a lot this year. This was an emotional-ridden year for OSU and Mike Boynton. Every press conference had more emotion as the season went on. It just meant something more to Boynton than I think almost any other year truly has. Because the determination to get your guys up every single morning, knowing that there's no real reward of what you're working towards this year. There's no March Madness. There's nothing. And for this team to be there, it does speak volumes of the character, how the locker room is held every single year. This is something that a lot of people do say about Coach Boynton, but let's start diving into that. So, number 3, OSU versus K-State.
So this was my personal favorite game of the year. It was physical throughout. OSU was below 500, yet they stuck through it. They never quit. This was toward the end of the season. There's really no chance, no hope at this point. But they stuck through it. They played a really physical game, very physical game. Came down to a final shot in overtime where Nigel Pack hits a free throw. Avery Anderson has to run up the court, pick and roll, gets an open 3, hits it, very few seconds on the clock. That was personally my favorite game.
Yeah, and also let's also factor in, we've talked about how the 3-point percentage of this was more abysmal throughout the year. This was the only game OSU shot over 40% from beyond the arc on 20 or more attempts, which it's quite helpful to be able to have that, especially at these junctures throughout the year. Now, let's start moving down to number 2. This is a more recent one for all OSU's fans, as this was the final game of the year, OSU versus Texas Tech.
This was another great game to watch. Last game of the season. Everyone knew it's going to end after this. The season was over no matter what. There's not even a Big 12 tournament for these guys. The season was going to be over. It was senior night. There's a lot of emotions with Bryce Williams getting honored and Isaac Likely especially getting honored. A lot of emotions right before the game. It was OSU's final chance to be 500. They're 14-15 entering the game, and they also never quit. They went down by 10 points at one point to Tech, and they came back. Tech didn't score for 9 minutes in the game, and they scored with a tip-in too. And OSU clawed back. They found their way. The final minutes of the game the final seconds took 20 minutes.
Yeah,
because there's a lot of reviews, there's a lot of challenges, but OSU stuck through it. They played good defense on the last possession, and they could have been a foul, but they came out with the win.
Exactly. And Bryce Thompson, once again, another a big dagger. I was going to say once again, but we're not at that game just yet, especially with the implication of what we have next. This was definitely a big one. You could feel the emotion in Gallagher-Iba. Anybody who was watching it, anybody who was there, you could be able to tell this game had more meaning than almost any other. And there was a lot of emotions being held at the UCO game, the exhibition at the beginning of the year after the postseason ban was implemented on OSU. But this game had a real special meaning, and you could see it in the players' eyes that this meant more than almost anything. But let's get down into number 1. OSU on the road at Baylor. Now, this is the first time in NCAA history when the Associated Press poll came out that a number 1 ranked team lost back-to-back home matches, as they originally lost to Texas Tech 2 days before. And then, because this is for many of the OG Ocali TV viewers, they can remember the first ever basketball preview we did was for this Baylor game. And this was one of the most entertaining games in almost quite a long time. We'll say it at that, as this was one of the worst shooting nights Baylor ever had this entire year. It was the second worst. They shot 31% from the field, 29% from deep. They only had 11 turnovers, Baylor Bears, but OSU was able to generate so much more off of this.
Now, this game was a little weird. Baylor was really bad. And it was coming off their first loss of the season to Tech. I believe that was their first loss in the entire season. And Baylor themselves probably needed a win. And they just didn't come out. But OSU didn't particularly come out the best either.
They didn't. It was a scratching game. They scratched and clawed.
It was a scrappy game. Bryce Thompson eventually took the game over. And OSU held on in the final seconds as Baylor tried to come back. But it wasn't the best game to watch as a basketball fan.
Yes.
But in terms of how OSU showed out, it was probably their best performance, especially this was Bryce Thompson's coming out party.
And considering after the major loss that they had to Tech in their final game as well. Now, let's try to shift things over into next season of what we're trying to at least look for. We've talked about that it player. That's been one major thing that we've mentioned. Now, there's also the news of guard Donovan Williams. He's now entering the transfer portal. That opens up another scholarship. What is it that OSU needs to continue to hone in on?
I think just keep working on the thing. We saw some improvements throughout the season. We saw Avery Anderson pick it up sometimes. We saw Bryce Thompson pick it up sometimes. We even saw Isaac Likely turn it on sometimes. In that TCU game, he had 19 points. Musa Cisse turned it on at times. They just need to keep doing that, honestly. And I know you didn't mention how it's hard. We're saying that everyone's going to stay, but there's not a chance. Like, there might be some chances because there's still a lot of question marks. Boynton talked about, I'm not worrying about recruiting until I worry about what's happening.
Yeah, exactly. Same. Yeah.
But there's no 100% certainty that more players are going to transfer. Donovan Williams already entered the transfer portal. He never really played anyways,
Yes.
so he's not the biggest loss, but do the
When it's a
Bruins
loss,
leave? Do Avery Anderson enter the draft? Does Isaac Likely decide to not go in his 5th year? There's a lot of question marks. Does Mosu Steve enter the draft? There's a lot of question marks for the team, so he's trying to – I think it's more important to focus on maybe some of the players that they could be missing instead of some of the players that are certain to stay.
Gabe, thank you so much for joining with me today. Now, we're going to take one quick break, but when we come back, we're going to send it down to the first floor of the Paul Miller Journalism Building, where our own Alejandro Cavazos and Brayden Bush, beat writer for the Ocali, they're going to be discussing how the Big 12 tournament went in Tulsa for wrestling, and also what to expect in Detroit this weekend. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
We would design something, it was set on the counter, and people was either, if enough of them said, this isn't it never made to the line. Dad was excited that they're all original. They were all designed on Mom's kitchen table, and it gets in your blood after a while.
We're very happy that Pamela and Michael have taken over the business and kept the family going.
We took the business over in 2017. When we found that it was available, we wanted to keep the legacy of family alive, but it was also incredible products that deserved to be a part of Made in Oklahoma's story. We were a part of Made in Oklahoma years ago, and so it kind of grew as Made in Oklahoma grew.
Oklahoma is ingrained into everything that we did. We've been here most of our life. That's what we entailed our whole business on, was the Oklahoma homegrown feeling.
I'm Kristin Hawkins. I went to Oklahoma State University here in Stillwater in '99 to 2004. I've always felt like Stillwater needed more family-friendly things to do, and we have opened up AR Workshop. We do everything from knitting blankets that can be done in a 3-hour class. We create doormats and porch signs, the Christmas wreaths with our yarn that we use for the blankets. We also do, we just started a new project for gnomes. We've done pumpkins during the fall, but our big thing that we do here are interior signs. Our designs are extremely unique to AR Workshop. Customers come in, everything is here for them to do. They create everything. They can be as hands-on as they want. They came in here to relax and have fun, and that they are proud of their project that they've made.
Thanks, Connor. Welcome back to the Writers' Room for Ocali TV. I'm Alejandro Cavazos, and this past weekend, the Oklahoma State Cowboys attended the Big 12 Wrestling Championship tournament, where I was lucky enough to attend. And one of the other attendees that came with me is the man joining me, Brayden Bush. Brayden, how would you rate the Cowboys' performance this past weekend? The Cowboys would come out in 4th place after a history for the last 9 seasons of coming out on top in 1st place.
Yeah, so, for the first time since the 2012 season, Oklahoma State leaves the Big 12 championships without the title, but even despite that, Oklahoma State left with the most titles out of anybody, 3 individual titles, but really what it came down to was the first day, Oklahoma State went 0 for 6 at 3 different weights, and so the rest of the way, Oklahoma State was just wrestling with 7 guys, and that really hurt the Cowboys later on in the weekend.
Yeah, no, exactly. Those first 2 sessions, the Cowboys were able to stay up in 1st place, but it wasn't until the 3rd session came in that Missouri came and sprang up all the way, and they secured that 1st place spot pretty early on before the 4th session even began. But moving on past our score, the Cowboys brought in 4 people towards the finals. Those 4 people being Dayton Fix at 133, Caden DeFeller at 149, Dustin Plott at 184, and Luke Server at heavyweight. We come out with 3 out of those 4 champions. But I want to focus on Luke Server here for a bit. He had an outstanding performance throughout the weekend. He was seeded number 7 for the tournament. How would you say he performed, especially on that final match?
Yeah, he definitely outperformed the seed throughout the weekend. First 3 rounds he beat 3 guys that he lost to during the regular season. So it was nice to see him flip the script, and kind of bounce back from the regular season and carry some momentum on into the postseason. But Luke Serber almost kind of filled the spot in for one of the guys that got knocked out early. He was a guy that maybe you didn't anticipate having that kind of performance, but he came out and made it all the way to the finals, like you said.
Yeah, no, he did. So besides just the finalists, the Cowboys came out with 7 placers overall and 8 qualifiers for the national tournament, with Wyatt Sheets being added as one of the at-large people for the national tournaments that happens, that's coming up in March 17th through the 19th.
Yep.
But for those 7 qualifiers, we had Carter Young placing at 7th. He had a kind of shaky beginning to the tournament, but he came out strong. He came back and had some hard-fought matches. Dakota Gear would get 5th place, and then Trevor Mastrogiovanni would finish in 3rd. Overall, good performance for the Cowboys in general.
Yeah, you know, it was nice to see Mastrogiovanni rebound in the consolation bracket. You know, he got knocked out in the semifinals to Cardinale, who went on to win the tournament. You know, a little bedlam matchup for 3rd place. You know, Mastrogiovanni was behind the entire match and came back, scored 4 points in the last 3 seconds to give OSU to 3rd place. You know, and Oklahoma State was kind of, you know, battling with Oklahoma for placing in the final overall team standing. So it was an important win for Oklahoma State and good for Mastrogiovanni, you know, going into the postseason further to nationals, you know.
Yeah, and kind of like you said there was a lot of close matches that literally the Cowboys scored a last-second takedown to come out on top, which is always exciting and fun. But John Smith kind of touched on this in some of the interviews throughout the entire season, talking about how we need to score points. You know, there's a couple different ways you can win. You can win based on scoring points and dominating your opponent, or you can leave it to where you're biting your nails and just kind of hoping to see if something happens at the end. So that's going to be something that's very important going into nationals here in a couple weeks, and just reevaluating how the Cowboys approach their matches and using this time that we have until we get there to prepare accordingly.
Yeah, you know, another guy that left the Big 12 champion, Dayton Fix, you know, I mean, he really cemented that he's one of the top guys in this weight class nationally. You know, he outscored his opponents 54-8 over the weekend, 2 tech falls in the opening round, followed by a major decision and a 6-2 victory in the finals over Biscaglia of Northern Iowa. You know, he looked like his dominant self. Like you said, Gefeller at 149, that was another bedlam matchup for the finals. Ended up coming down to a penalty point off of a stall call that gave Gefeller the win. And then Dustin Plott at 74, you know, Coach Smith talked about that was probably his first big win in his entire career, getting that Big 12 title.
Yeah, Plott, I mean, it came down to that last-second takedown with like 17 seconds left.
Yeah, like you said, that was another close win, yep.
Yeah. Going back to Fix kind of has a big thing to prove this year. I mean, he's made it to the NCAA finals for the last 2 years, and he has lost both of those matches. The first one to Nick Suriano in 2019, and then Brayden Young in the year before. And you know, he has a lot to prove just to himself in general, getting to finally get that #1 spot. He also plays second in the Worlds, and this has been his year. He has been tremendous this whole season and dominating any opponent that he's
Yeah, definitely. Like you said, you know, there's not much in his career that he hasn't done. Undefeated high school record, 4-time state champion high school, and 2 times coming in the #1 overall seed to the NCAA tournament, but he hasn't won it. But this year, like you said, you know, I mean, he's coming out in full force. You know, he's looking like a guy that can really compete for this national title. And even the post game, he talked about it. He said, I got the same mindset going in. He said, I've had my eye on this national title his whole career now. So now you'll see, like you said, in 2 weeks, be in Detroit and see if he gets it done.
With all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Brayden, thank you a lot for coming here and talking about wrestling with me. For Ocali TV, I'm Alejandro Cavazos.
The hopes are when folks drink our water is that they'll drink it for a few days and find out the difference. They'll start feeling better because there's been no chemical in our water. There's a list of good things that we have. We don't have any bad things in it. I see the future of Divine Water as being worldwide, which will bring outside dollars into the state. It means a lot to me because I started it, I guess, and our family started it.
we use the very best of the best ingredients. Demerara sugar is the best there is. Very high quality fruits, berries. The milk we use is the best milk there is. That's what makes our product stand by itself. I like to make yogurt because I like to eat yogurt. We've been doing this for ourselves for many years because it's a tradition in our family. And we want to have a product which would be very similar to French yogurt, but with our touch of uniqueness, linking our name, our product, with the reputation of the Made in Oklahoma Coalition was probably the best thing we have done as far as promoting our product.